Blessed be Great Rising, New Moon Energy, New Flow. As we're getting ready for the week, as you're getting ready for your week, as you're getting ready for your day, it's time to assess the thoughts behind being naked and afraid. I remember a lot of times where I didn't have the aspects of understanding being naked or being exposed. And on the other end, it was dealing with the fears. So when we think about being naked and afraid, it's the difference between being emotionally raw. So we're thinking about being emotionally raw. So think about being triggered and a wound being open. And then you're thinking about vulnerability. That's the ability to assess that wound itself. When we think about being emotionally raw, we look for the coping mechanisms or the band-aids in necessity to use our nakedness to a certain extent. Best way to explain being naked and afraid is, as I came to learn, was I didn't have a fear of being naked as long as I could set a price to me being naked, to me being exposed, to me being naked. That always gave me that sense of being emotionally raw. That always gave me that sense of this mindset where like, ooh, I'm not afraid to be naked. I'm not afraid to show myself. But it was always at a price that I always set a price or this external narrative or standard to be naked. It was under the guise of not being disrespected, not being told certain things about myself, not having my behavior checked. That was me being emotionally raw. The fear of me being truly vulnerable. The fear of me being able to sit in a space and have things come to me and teach me things about myself or show me something about myself. Emotional rawness is like, as we've been breaking down through the last couple of weeks, that emotional rawness is that wound that is present, that trauma that keeps coming up, that event that keeps coming up, that leaves you frustrated, leaves you sad, leaving you in that state of depression, leaving you in that state of, in the fear-based aspects of ourselves, in that lower aspect of ourselves, where we search for the Band-Aid. We search for the coping mechanism. We search for expectancy over acceptance. Naked and afraid. Being naked, you have to accept that being afraid or removing the set identities that we used as those coping mechanisms. Look into your space. I remember looking at my space. I remember telling myself my earlier mantras, where I would sit in the mirror for hours. I would sit in the mirror for like 20, 30 minutes at a time. And I would sit there with my eyes closed and I would just have this conversation with myself. And I would say things like, I no longer want to be seen as my behavior. I no longer want to be seen as my habits. I no longer want to be seen as simply my patterns. I no longer want to be seen as a necessity. I want to be seen in my authenticity. I say this for about 15 minutes in the mirror with my eyes closed like I'm doing now. And then I open my eyes. And at first, nothing would pop up. At first, nothing would pop up in the screen. Like I would just see physical aspects of myself. So I would see my weight. I would see my face. I would see my beard. I would see like physical aspects in the mirror that left me the aspects of my emotional rawness, me being in that space, me getting used to that space. But then as I started doing this more and more, and then going out into the space and allowing myself to like, whatever bothered me that I saw in the mirror, then I allowed myself to look at that aspect in the mirror, and I allowed myself to I had to own that authenticity. Grand Rising. I wanted to feed my authenticity. So patchy beard, not having my beard all the way in place, not having these defined lines that are in my beard now, as an example, that was me accepting the vulnerability and not looking at other things in my space to be like, ooh, if I go get this, go get that, go get this, then I can have my beard in place. If I do this and I do this and I go to Ulta Beauty or the whatever and go get this, then I can go out into the space. No one's going to see me. No one's going to be able to say anything about me. But here's the thing. Being naked and afraid when you go into that space is similar to if you had like a lot of weight, you lost a lot of weight, and then you're still going out and you're in your mind because all you're remember your unseen creates your space. Since I haven't assessed the subconscious aspects and I'm going out into the space and into my world, now I'm still looking at the world as when I was fat. I was looking at the world, I'm still looking at the world through the trauma. So it really didn't matter what I acquired because I did not yet learn to apply. So after a while, remember your space is created by this. You try to keep your space to match that aspect, that fear and that coping mechanism. You keep going to places where it's based in expectancy or that necessity with yourself. So yes, okay, I'm gonna keep going over here. So now I'm looking at myself and I'm going through these aspects with these triggers and these wounds. And to avoid being triggered, now I start doing the triggering. In order for me not to be triggered or to get the trigger hit on me, I'm going into spaces where I can initiate the trigger. I can have the conversation and lead the conversation. I can still, and basically what I was really doing was I was remaining in the same comfort zone. I was remaining in the same comfort zone. This is when you have those aspects of, we've all heard that in the community, like, go try to lose weight and go around your family. First thing, your family gonna be like, I think he on that shit. You okay? You sick? You all right? Like, no. This is me to this aspect was for me to learn my boundaries. Everything in your space is teaching you about yourself. It's teaching you your boundaries. It's teaching you your standards must change. It's teaching you that instead of looking at it through this filter and being like, yeah, all these motherfuckers is this and these motherfuckers is narcissistic. If you can see it, as we're always getting into, if I can see it, if it triggers me, if I can react to it, if it's right there in my face, if it triggers me, whether how big or small the trigger and the effect of it, that's a part of me. Somewhere with me, in me being naked or allowing myself to truly be naked, that means I got to remove the identity. That means I have to assess what I'm afraid of. This is when we're thinking about that balance between you being truly naked, having a truly naked conversation. A truly naked conversation is where it's not about this state of holding back from assumption, but it's allowing yourself to speak the assumptions and now come into the assessment. All of it aspect when you're going into your shadow work, you're going into this internal work with yourself, it's not about shutting shit down. That's what you lived in the that traumatic space for. It's about you really assessing why you always go to that assumption. Why do you allow your mind to go to that point? That's the vulnerability. When you're stuck in that being emotionally raw, that wound that's ever present, emotionally raw, that means you stay in that space with yourself of always remaining angry. And then instead of assessing why I'm angry or allowing this space to give me the self-reflection of why I'm always getting angry in that space and seeing myself in that space, seeing how my energy flows into that space, then I'm like, oh, I wasn't vulnerable. I was emotionally raw. Because now I can look at the space where I felt disrespected. I could have been disrespected. I felt disrespected based off an assumption that I created. Most of the times, whenever I had an assumption, even if I didn't speak the assumption, remember, even when you don't say it, the thought that you have in your mind, that breath that you breathe into that space, it attaches to you, and now you in your space looking defeated. This is when we start thinking about, especially with this new energy, new moon energy in that Cancer, that new program, think about the aspects of assessing your space, and what attaches to you is already a part of you. We talked about that deep on Friday. What is a part of you is what attracts to you. So if you're always in a space to where there's avoidance, neglect, rejection, insecurity, jealousy, the only way that can take root inside of your space is if it's already a part of you. This is when you become mindful of the conversation. You become mindful of protecting your energy. Because as you protect your energy, you understand that the attachments that attach to you, they need something to feed off of. That's that thought form. So if I'm always going into space, let's use an example of going to my old job. Go to my old job, it's always hectic. It was always some type of drama going on at a certain point in time. So now I'm in that space. I'm in this space for 8 to 12 to 15 hours a day. Think about how that affects me energetically. So now when I go home and I'm coming down to that wind down, everything in my space is going to irritate me. Every little thing can irritate me or put me in a certain space because I'm still feeding what I didn't deal with. I'm still feeding that. It's still being fed. That identity that I had to keep up for that necessity within that space, it still has to be fed. That fear still has to be fed in your space. As a point, when you're in your authentic self and you go into a space and everybody has all eyes on you or everything's all on you, your energy speaks for you. This is that authenticity. I love being naked. I love being in that state of vulnerability. It took a long time for me to go through that state and get into that state of vulnerability with myself. It took a long time for me, even using an example, for me to go live and do the lectures and the classes and provide consultations and provide therapy sessions. It took me a long time to get to this point because I had to go through the layers and allow myself to become naked. That nakedness, that becoming naked requires you to assess what you're afraid of based on that identity. A lot of us become naked and you take the sense of putting on makeup, or I just put on a little bit of makeup, or I put on the nude color, or I put on this. Why do you put that on? Why do you keep putting that identity on? What is behind that mask? What is behind that space? You got to take that accountability. Man, because every time I go over there, I feel disrespected. So why do you keep going over there? Identity match. That identity match, that emotional paraphrase. Because it's family. So you're telling me that, I used to tell myself that all the time. So everybody else gets the parameters and the standards of my boundaries, but my family. Everybody get the boundaries the same. The boundary is the same for every aspect if I'm protecting my energy. There is no variable difference in that aspect because I understand that everything outside of me is attracted based on my unseen, the things I haven't dealt with. Everything that's going to come into my space is going to trigger me damn near the same. Everything going to come in my space is going to trigger me damn near the same. So if I'm in that cutoff game and I'm cutting off people all left and right, in the external sense, it's easy to cut off friends, it's easy to cut off the job, but now that that aspect that I'm not assessing when I'm making that cutoff still has to be assessed. Or when I go into another space, it's just going to make it stronger. So now I go to my mother crib, and I've used this example before. Put it like this. I remember using this as an example, using this as a build into that perception. I remember going to my mom's house when I was hungry. Remember going to my mom's house when I was hungry. So my mom would make Sunday dinner. My mom would make something on Wednesday or whatever. Her house was always open to that. Her house was always open to that food. I didn't eat. This is layers to it of coming into that space. I remember the conversations between my mom and my pops, the arguments between my mom and my pops, sisters, brothers, everybody coming into the space, that argument, that energy still in that space. Even when they shift houses, you don't assess it. It's still in that space. That's what created that space. So I remember going to my mom's house, and I'd eat the food. I eat, sit there for a little bit, eat, chill out, have a nice little conversation until I started getting irritated. I always wondered why I was getting irritated for a little bit, and I knew it was my time to leave. Now when I go back to my house, now when I'm going back to my spot or wherever I need to go to, now I'm noticing that my energy's lower. My energy's not my energy. My thoughts are not my thoughts. Or my thoughts are connected to some other thought process. So I find myself for the next couple of days, or the next couple of days at least, feeding those aspects. Then I had to realize that I kept putting myself in that space. I wasn't assessing the energy. The reason that I felt that need, the reason that we feel these needs, is because it's that unassessed aspect. We talked about that Friday when we were talking about the aspects of, until you deal with those traumatic aspects with yourself and you really face those aspects, every relationship is going to be a reflection of the relationship of something that you're longing and needing from your mother, your father, your great-grandfather, ancestor, past life regression. It's going to go all the way back, and you're still feeding those aspects. That's why I always say shadow work is an ongoing process. You have multiple shadows, or multiple ancestors, or multiple spirits, or your multiple demons, or your legions, the 144, the 72 Goetias, all of those aspects. Those are the shadows that you have to integrate with, because those are the anchor points. 72 Goetias, all those are your anchor points. You have to assess in your space how those points resemble and reflect you. That's the applying process. It's not just one shadow. You have to see yourself in these individuals. This is the aspect when we think about the first thing when I'm breaking down the people that have never done shadow work, even when I'm doing a recap of shadow work, first question that I get asked a lot of times is, but what if what if my mom doesn't accept this, or my pops don't accept this, or what if my aunt don't accept it or say what they need to say? It isn't about them accepting it. It isn't about them bringing it to the surface. It's about you accepting their answer. It's about removing that expectancy and accepting that answer. That's what the trauma was for in the first place. It's about accepting their answer. I remember asking my mother so many damn questions, and at first I could just get mad all over again, get really, really sensitive, because that wound was still present. But then I would run it back, and then I asked my mother the questions, and when I started accepting her answer, the wound could show itself. I was truly becoming vulnerable. When I started asking the questions based on acceptance, I'm going to accept my mother's answer no matter what it is. Whether she says she doesn't remember, whether she says you remember that, whatever she says, I'm going to accept that answer. Because that's going to be the key to me assessing my wound. That's going to be the key to me assessing that space. That's similar to whenever you want to go into the higher levels of the astral realm And you're wondering why you keep getting stuck in certain spaces is because you still got expectancies. It's just like, I remember breaking down a long time ago for people, and I was breaking down to somebody, I was like, you have to become whatever energy you're trying to come, you got to become the counterpart to it. So if you got some maternal wounds or some feminine wounds that you want to tap into, and you want to tap into the dark mother, you want to tap into Kali energy, you want to tap into Kali energy, you want to tap into Mama Brigitte, you want to tap into those higher energies, you got to become the masculine counterpart. And the way to become the masculine counterpart is to visualize yourself as the masculine counterpart. Man, that's gay. I ain't gonna imagine myself as no nigga. Then you're not gonna tap into that feminine aspect of the energy. Same thing when you want to tap into the masculine aspect of the energy. You gotta become the visualization of the feminine aspect. The same way you gotta assess down here is the same way you assess it up here. There's no difference. The only difference is this is an aspect of the mental state. This is what creates and trickles down to this space. This is what trickles down into this space because you've been doing it unconsciously forever. You've been trying to you go into that space for fear of being naked or removing an identity. You moving in that space. You've been moving in that space unconsciously forever. I remember this is the key and we're going to get into this on Friday and we're going to get into it on the podcast. The reason that you want to save everybody or you want to bring everybody with you is because you're not looking for yourself inside of them. You see yourself based on the emotional trauma, but you don't accept. And that's that seeing yourself in your mother. That's that seeing yourself in your father. That's that seeing yourself in your grandmother. That's your seeing yourself in your aunt. Seeing yourself in your uncle. Seeing yourself in old lady Gladys that was up the street that was giving out lemonade and back rubs when you were over there cutting her grass. That's you seeing yourself in Uncle Ricky or the Uncle Ricky of the neighborhood that would always say, hey, red dresser, hey, I used to talk to you. Me and your mama used to rock back in the day. That's you seeing yourself in that person. That's your seeing yourself in that trauma. That's your seeing yourself in that. Because until you see yourself and accept yourself in that individual, in that conduit, what you need to see with yourself, you're always going to try to manipulate it. That's where the manipulation comes from. Whether you do it unconsciously, try to get through life, or you're doing it consciously or unconsciously. So now you're looking at the person that you're saying is narcissistic and the narcissistic and toxic. You got to remember, just as we always saying, the only reason you can see it, react to it, and get triggered by it is because it's a part of you. It's a part of you. That's why it's there. So instead of you saying I'm cutting off all the narcissistic and toxic motherfuckers in my life and everybody that ain't on my level, but you keep attracting the same. Why do you think you keep attracting the same people on that same level? I'm trying to level up, and everybody keep coming to my space. Every time I focus on a nigga, every time I focus on it, you're on that space. You got to be honest with yourself. You keep opening up to become emotionally raw. You keep opening up with an emotional expectancy. That's that emotional rawness. So when you feel angry, sad, upset, when you're feeling the fear of the emotion, that's being emotionally raw. Being open to being vulnerable is removing the expectancy. It's opening up to acceptance. It's opening up to your responsibility of yourself. That's that being naked. That's that having that naked conversation. Remember, it's not about shutting down your assumptions, shutting down the emotional thought process or whatever you're feeling. It's about being able to sit in that space and assess it. You've done assumptions based on accountability all the time. I remember a lot of times in periods of time, people would listen to earlier lectures and earlier lives, and they be like, you can so easily talk about cutting this off and self and family and all of those narratives. And you got to ask the question. You're assuming that when I said to the natural separation of my family, you're acting like I just did it just now. Me doing the natural separation process was going back into 5, 6, 7 years ago, 10 years ago, in assessing not fixing the relationship with my mother based on expectancy. It was fixing the relationship with my mother based on acceptance. It was fixing the relationship with my pops based on acceptance. It was fixing or assessing those relationships based on acceptance, not expectancy. That's the only way that you integrate with that shadow. Because until then, you always going to be living in the shadows of people that you probably didn't even know. That say you never knew your mother. Therefore, now that's a shadow that you have to assess. Or you're living in a phantom shadow of your mother that never was there. So now everything that comes into your space, every woman that comes into your space, every female friend, every girlfriend, every female, every effeminate nigga, even to the, and then we shifting gears, even to the feminine aspect of the feminine males that come into your life, they're all based in the shadows of the mother that you never knew. They're all based, and now you got the overly masculine females in your life, or the overly masculine men in your life, the overly masculine women in your life. They're all based on the shadows of the father that you never knew. This is you going into that being naked. This is you removing that filter so you can have that conversation. It's not about avoidance. Everything that you're doing is not going to be based on avoidance. Yeah, I ain't talked to my mom in 6 months. Why? Because every time I talk to her, it's always this, this, and this. Remove the expectancy and you'll be able to have that conversation. You're going to learn how to remove that expectancy to have that conversation with your mother. You're going to learn how to remove that expectancy to have that conversation with your pops. You're going to learn to remove that expectancy to deal with what you need to deal with. You got to remove that expectancy. That expectancy that lets you know that you're afraid of it. That expectation, you only set expectations when you're afraid of what could happen. You only set expectations when you're emotionally raw and you're tired of being opened up the same damn way. You only set expectations based on that. Because if you go into a space based on acceptance and just being raw, naked you can flourish in that space. Whatever that space is going to teach you, give you, help you learn, you're going to learn in that space. Until then, your life is nothing but a damn meme. Speaking of memes, this Thursday, today, Tuesday, 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we getting into memes and teams. This is We's God Our Podcast. I am on fire right now, by the way. I'm on fire, like my body's literally on fire. But we're getting into memes and teams. We're getting into the aspects of you have to do the work. It's like a lot of times when we're coming into our healing, we coming into this work, you're coming into your shadow work and you coming into this space, you're using the meme aspect or the coping mechanism. It's like putting that ADT. Yeah, can't stop moving. I gotta keep going. You gotta put yourself, think about it like this. Being emotionally raw, that means not assessing the emotion, is like putting that beware of dog sign on your front door and you ain't got a dog. It's like putting that ADT or that CPT or that home security system on the door and you know you ain't got no security system. That's what it's like when you're using the meme-like aspect as a coping mechanism. So you can flow through that. And this week in the God Hour Podcast, that's that. We're going to get into, we break it down into 3 segments if you're not aware. We break it down into 3 different segments. Let me go to the page real quick. Let me pull it up real quick on the laptop. That premature post. You want to cut everybody off. Exactly, Captain. You want to cut everybody. I'm cutting off all toxic motherfuckers and all this shit in my life. If I don't assess the why that was there in the first place, it only regrows. It's like the Hydra. Now you cut off one raggedy ass nigga. You got that shit. You cut off one toxic ass nigga or one toxic ass chick in your life. But now 6 or 7 other ones are in your inbox. 6 or 7 other ones are on your page. 6 or 7 other ones are in your face, trying to hit you up. It's because you're not assessing why they keep coming into your space. So it just keeps multiplying in your space so you can see it. And then we gonna get into this. This leads us into the subliminal martyr. This is a very interesting topic that I want to break down. The subliminal martyr. This is that complex where that identity that you're trying to hold on to, that identity that you haven't held on to, you're avoiding damage to the identity. The subliminal martyr complex is when we avoid the damage to the identity. Everything in your space is meant to push you past your comfort zone. Every relationship, friendship, whatever it is meant to push you past your comfort zone. When we become the subliminal martyr with ourselves, or that subconscious martyr complex with ourselves, it's like nobody around you checks you. Nobody around you is saying, hey, that behavior, let's have a conversation. I had to understand with myself, this is where I'm going to use the trigger word cooning, the cooning or the feeling aspect. If everybody around me in my space is not challenging me, or if I'm the only one that has something to say inside of my space, that means I need to really assess my space. But when I'm stuck on trying to maintain that identity, then I'll go pick up one of the new age words. I'll pick up, yeah, man, because you got to understand, we've been through a struggle. I'm saying I've been through a struggle, even if I don't believe it. Because now I got to wonder why I'm always struggling. Why are you always struggling? Because you said you were born, you said you was in struggle. You subliminally became the martyr to maintain that said identity. And in the last segment is going to be, who am I? Before I can see myself in my projections and how I project, before I can see everybody else as their projections, as we talked about earlier on in this live, I have to assess and see myself in that space. I have to accept seeing myself in that space, not as what I want to be, not as my identity, but as I truly am. A lot of you go into spaces, you got those especially the inner listening and the inner child wounds, and then you got past life regression wounds, and you keep going into space and wondering why you get irritated, wonder why you mad, wonder why things keep happening, wonder why every plane you trying to bring into that space. I want to see the best in this person, and I want to keep seeing the best. That's not what they're there for. You keep trying to push them into a space that you're not open to it, so they're not going to be open to it. You got to understand that's what you're seeing yourself in. You keep trying to push your inner child into more dark rooms before you go in there and assess the room. But that's what we're going to get into in this martyr comp. That's what we're going to get into this Tuesday. As we get into on the podcast. The memes and teams. It's cool to yell out. I'm not going to let anybody disrespect me. But every day you disrespect yourself when you go into that space anyway. It's easy to yell at you a god and a goddess, a king and a queen. But as a king and a queen, what are you surveying? Remember, you've always been abundant. You've always been prosperous. You've always been wealthy. You've always been everything that you needed to be. But what are you surveying is whatever you're surveying as that king and not dealing with that wound, that's what you're abundant in. So if you haven't dealt with your emotional wound of anger, you're always going to be abundant in things that are going to keep you angry. So you damn well sure going to have motherfuckers that are going to be disrespecting you because you're abundant in anger. You keep avoiding that overflow. It's time to do the work. It's time to step in and assess yourself and do that work. You can't keep avoiding it forever. You can't keep putting on a nice little mask and forever, or else you will return. I desire you to be the fucking best. I desire you to be the fucking best. Everything from consultations to readings to spiritual advisement, life coaching, spiritual therapy, the shadow work, the shadow therapy, assessing inner child wounds, adolescent wounds, past life regressions, all of that work. Hit me up in the inbox. Hit me up in the inbox. Set that appointment. Let's get that started if you're ready. Tell me about your mother. Tell me about your pops. Tell me what you remember about your grandfather. Tell me what you remember about your uncle. Tell me the first time that this happened. Tell me the first thing that's happened. That's all. That's what happens whenever we come into an assessment in the consultation. I'm allowing you to lead me to what question to ask next. So that's why you got to be ready and you got to be open. You got to allow yourself to get emotionally raw so you can become vulnerable. You got to allow yourself to get naked. You got to allow yourself to be afraid. Stop saying you ain't afraid of shit, because as long as you have anger and sorrow and insecurity and jealous, you're always going to be scared to death. As long as you are living in the fear-based narrative of your traumas, you will always be afraid of death. You'll always be afraid of death. I desire you to be the fucking best. I love you. We love us. Ashe.